Hello and welcome to the Pre-Chiro podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Glass, and today we're making a connection out in Europe with Dr. Richard Lanigan. Can you kind of just get us started by introducing yourself and also reflecting back to that moment in life you were at when you decided you wanted to become a chiropractor?
Well, to start with, I wish you hadn't called me doctor.
My bad.
it's a bad start. I hate the title because most of the public associated doctors with medicine, right? I realize we are entitled to use the title, and it's been an ongoing thing. But whether we like it or not, the public, when you say doctor, they think medicine, and I think it's one of the kind of underlying problems the profession has. It's because on the one hand, you want half the profession to be like medical doctors, and the other half kind of subscribe to a different philosophy of well-being and health, right? But you still got this idea what the public. So if the public thinks you're a doctor and it's medical, it's very difficult to make them aware of anything else, right? So for me, I'd never heard of chiropractic till I went to live in Denmark in 1979. When I was 16, I was a good footballer and I had an injury for about 6 months. And my father took me to a bone setter in the country in Ireland, a guy who, and I still remember, you go in and he just finishing milking the cows and he comes in and he's got cow dung all over his Wellington boots. And I'm thinking, geez, who's my dad took me to, right? This is a proper quack, shall we say. So weirdly, I kind of like it when people call me a quack, right? So I'm there, and this guy comes in, he starts fiddling around with me, my foot, and kind of, tweaks a few toes, puts me on my side, and cracks my back. And I thought, wow. And suddenly I felt good. And I thought, this guy had no children. He had learned this skill from his father. And I thought, wow, that's terrible. It's going to die with him, right? So about 5, 6 years later, I'm in Denmark. I went to Denmark to play football, got injured. And I was one of the pioneers of the way people exercise today, right? Because they gave me a coaching job I had 2 years left of my contract. They gave me a coaching job with the ladies football team. And so on the back of the Jane Fonda, I had trained originally as a PE teacher. And I'd seen the Jane Fonda video and I thought girls would like this as a way of warming up. And so they really loved it. And one day the first team coach was watching. He goes, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, that's the way the Brazilian footballers kind of loosen up because, they're into dance and movement." He said, "Really? Oh." So he asked me to do that with the senior team, which I did. And a journalist was watching it. And he wrote a story about this new thinking was going to elevate HIK to, kind of be like the Brazilians. And within literally a month, I was doing this with the national football team, handball team. It was weird. It was 82, the Jane Fonda because in the 70s, I mean, people who went jogging every day were health freaks. They were weirdos, bit like chiropractor, you know what I mean, right? It was just, and suddenly I was this kind of good, and I was changing stuff from the Jane Fonda, like Jane Fonda in the original wasn't wearing shoes, for example, and, it was all the spandex look, and I wanted kind of to wear T-shirts and make it for everybody, and sweatshop just took off, right? And Team Denmark, which was they funded all the elite sports people in Denmark. Were asking me to work with all their athletes and all their elite people. And at this time, I became friends with a chiropractor called Ola Vessung. He was a Palmer graduate, right? And we were mates. So he would say, and he was always like, "Oh, let me." And it wasn't, he wasn't the type of guy who, kind of push me into regular care or anything. We were friends. And one day I started working with Kirsten Larson was her name. She was the best badminton player in the world, right? And she had knee problems. And they had been, she'd had arthroscopy, everything, all the experts, right? But she was having these problems for about nearly a year, and nobody could find her. And Ola goes, let me have a look at her. And I was going, because, this was my PR, these athletes, right? Like it was it was the first of the kind of you see now everywhere. But in those days, these type of fitness centers were only really in America. There was bodybuilders or dance centers, right? And I kind of based, I don't know if you've ever, the Void Center of La Seneca Boulevard. And it was where Jane Fonda actually used to go and do her weight training. So, and I was going, now, like, because like if you hurt her, my whole credibility is kind of, but I wasn't making the progress with the exercise I wanted. So I said, okay, I had nothing to lose. Okay, this is my friend Ola. And I still remember it, right? Because it was a knee problem. And Ola went straight to her ankle, right? And I'm like, what are you doing? It's her, no. And he's like looking at her, right? And then he looks at her neck, right? He's a Gonstead kind of practitioner, right? And I go like, oh. So he goes, ooh, yeah, right? Something wrong with the ankle, right? And he pops it, then he pops her atlas. And I'm like, oh shit, right? I can still remember the sound of the crack. I thought he'd killed her. And and he gets up and he's like, wow, it felt different, It was amazing. It was amazing to me. And so then we started, right? Basically, all the elite athletes. Now, I'm talking about everybody in Denmark was coming to the sweatshop, right? And so, yeah, I'd always, because I work with physios and, everybody. And so I thought, okay, Ola, check them out, right? See that they're free of subluxation, and then I'll put them on my training program. And it was incredibly successful. And then in the late 90s, I was kind of getting bored of, because then it was a business. Everybody, when it was new, and people said, what's aerobics? And because I visited the Cooper Clinic in Dallas to know about the testing and, cardiovascular disease and exercise. And, I was really into it. It's weird, actually, where it took me. So it was just a business then, how you could kind of get more money out of your clients and whatever, and sign them up for a year and then hope they never come to the gym again, right? That was the business model. And I didn't want to do that. People just paid for we had 100 people an hour in 3 studios just coming through. And it's the busiest fitness center I've ever been in, And then I just kind of said, okay, I want to do something else. And I thought, I'd like to go back and train to be a chiropractor and work like Ola and just work with elite sports people, right? And make training programs and stuff. So in 91, I left Denmark, went back to the UK to study at the Anglo-European College of Chiropractic in Bournemouth. Now, at the time, I knew nothing about the divisions and whatever. And the last thing Ola said to me is kind of weird because I'm very political, right? I've met Fidel Castro. So I've worked in Cuba. So, people go like, Ola says, don't get involved in the politics of the profession, whatever you do, right? And I was going to listen to him. I still remember, it's so weird. So I go to the college and there was kind of 2 distinct. So I'm an older student. I was 35 years of age. I'm now 65 when I entered. And so there was these 2 groups, which I couldn't understand. So there was people who want to be like medical doctors. And there was people who I saw as, more kind of like a religious evangelist for chiropractic, which definitely, that wasn't, I was nothing like that, because growing up in Ireland, Catholic Ireland, anything that smelled of religion or extremism or lack of tolerance, I wasn't. So, but I didn't like, I thought the medical view were so limited. When the reason I didn't play at a good level after my ACL operation. In those days, they immobilized your whole leg. So you were in plaster from the toes right up to the hip. And then when the plaster was taken off, I mean, you couldn't bend it. You know, so you'd be in plaster for about 3-4 months. Then they would take off the plaster and you can't walk. So degeneration had set into the immobilized joint. And that's what got me thinking, wow, chiropractic, you know, and movement. Okay. So the people who are kind of keen on being part of the biomedical profession and prescribing, it kind of, yeah, you know, so I didn't know. I was kind of a lost soul in the college, if you like. Then there was a lot of problems with the admin, how they were just taking the money. There was a lack of respect for the students. But the students were always complaining, but they were taking this shit. And I go, why do you know, because I've come from successful business and like, you know, all these young kids are like, oh, and then there was a small group that would get involved in the politics, right? But nobody was really interested. It was the apathy. And apathy is the problem in relation to what you asked me first, the politics of the profession. So I said, okay, right. You know, they were, could you do better? And I said, yeah, right. No. And they said, okay, you go to be president of the Student Union. And I said, okay, right. I will do it if 85% of the students physically voted. Because normally you just get a small percentage of students who get involved, right? So I said, okay, if I get 85%, I will put myself, I'll be the student president. And I got near on 90% of the students who physically voted for me. So it's not just a majority. I want them to go and vote, right? Not just 90% of the people who cast their votes, right? It really generated interest because I went around to each year and said how the school needed to be changed and the role of students. We were paying their fees. The admin and the tutor need to understand they were working for us, right? And that was basically the start of it. And, you know, I was proper kind of fighter going in and things started to change immediately, right? Particularly in the social life of the college. And that's what won the students over to my kind of way of thinking. At this point, it wasn't so much about anything to do with chiropractic philosophy or whatever. But what happened was, and I remember when Reggie Gold was invited by what they call the philosophy group to come and speak at the college. I wasn't interested. And then a student comes to me and says, Reggie Gold has been banned from the college. And I went, what? Right? I mean, I'd never heard of, you know, anything like this. It seemed ridiculous to me. So, and I got more information and they had to, you know, meet Reggie Gold somewhere off campus. So I went into the deputy head and I said, because the head wasn't a chiropractor, the deputy head was a chiropractor. And I went in and said, this is bullshit. I said, look, right? I said, if Hitler wants to come on campus and talk, I want to hear what he's got to say. Because if I don't hear what he's got to say, how can I reject him? Right? So anyone can spirit. I mean, we saw this with COVID, where there wasn't honest debate. And so lots of crazy conspiracy theory, rather than having a genuine debate that healthy people are not at risk, you know? But if you deny that debate, say, no, the only way to deal with COVID is to have a vaccine. You know, it's stupid, right? I mean, it just doesn't make sense in evolutionary theory, however.
All right, you're skipping around a lot. You're skipping around a lot. You just mentioned Reggie Gold. You mentioned Reggie Gold. You talked about thinking differently. That's what attracted you.
Well, I went to the Reggie Gold, but this is the interesting. I went to hear Reggie Gold speak, and I thought, that was him. You know, he was very entertaining. You know, and because I was student president, and we were introduced, and we had a laugh, and so now I'm kind of, I mean, there's more to the whole thing, you know, in a political sense then and it tied in with my subluxation theory, with the idea of movement, right? So suddenly I was thinking differently. And then as student president I went to the World Congress of Chiropractic Students in Los Angeles. Still makes me, I hired a car, right? And I rode up. So I can't remember the president. They can run there because I parked in the president's spot. I can't remember his name now. The president of LAC. And I go, I am the president, right? And because I said it with an English accent, they didn't want to argue. So we went in. And I was put in, I remember, I don't know, do you know Danny Knowles, Mile High? So I was, because some of what I'd call the more nerdy type of students thought, okay, it'd be fun to put Richard, because I was going there to see what all this was about. And they put me into a room with Danny Knowles and 3 Sherman grads, right? And I'm thinking, they thought, okay, that's going to really annoy them talking about chiropractic all the time. But we got on great. It was really strange. Talking chiropractic, because I'd never heard people talk about it like that in a kind of a relaxed. What I'd heard about, if you like, Southern evangelists. I mean, these were well-educated knowledge, and they weren't slagging off anybody. They were just doing their own thing. And if you wanted to be a medical practitioner, fine. But we're Sherman. We correct something because the life people seem to, Sid Williams, they wanted to compromise to get the insurance payments, to get more bums on seat in Life College. Well, Tom Gilardi and those students, no, this is what we do. If you like it, fine, go somewhere else, right? We're traditional, straight subluxation chiropractic.
Do you think that same issue still exists today with AECC or just Europe in general? Like a lot of students come into school and they're not really aware of what chiropractic is?
Well, it depends what they've been exposed to. You see, the trouble chiropractic has is you have 2 sides, okay? Each side is dominated by the loudest 10% on either side. When the 80% they're not that different, but 40% gravitate one way and 40% because they have been told, oh, they're bad, they're ripping off the public. They all want to prescribe me like medical doctors. And what was interesting, I saw the Joe Rogan podcast where he said it was the problem he had with chiropractic. I only saw this recently, right? And I thought it was interesting because he starts off, he goes, oh my God, and they're medical, right? So to the outside world, chiropractic is one homogenous profession. And so they get information about, they think they're medical doctors, right? And then he goes on, and what's this subluxation shit, right? So because the medical side of the profession writes all this crap for the skeptics to pick up on. So they're going like, and look at this. But it isn't. I mean, I have, about 6 or 7 medical people who are patients, practice members, whatever you want to call them, right? And I can talk about the idea of chiropractic because I keep it fairly simple, in terms of explaining, if you like, the function of the autonomic nervous system, that either you're in a state of, fight, flight, or you want to get in a sympathetic state. So how do you achieve that? Well, so if you're, just want to manage people's back pain, okay, fine. But by managing their back pain, you're going to have an effect on their immune system, right? But if you want to say, by just, kind of correcting the subluxation, I'm treating your cancer, right? Well, chiropractic shouldn't be about treating anything. That's the biomedical model, right? So when I wanted to incorporate if you like, exercise and stuff, right? From what I was an expert in. When Craig Livingston started promoting rehab, right, for back pain in the 90s. Now I'm thinking, oh, this is good. But what I didn't think, chiropractors would start to use rehab instead of adjusting people. They would kind of be physical therapists or something. And that changed me when I went to the Centennial. And I went to the Centennial, that was in 95 at Davenport. And Guy Reckman gave his talk, The Power of One, right? And I was sitting beside an English chiropractor called Steve Carpenter. And Steve just come down to the college, and he was like an old hippie, right? And we buried Steve yesterday. It was his funeral, right? And if anybody kind of turned on British chiropractic to traditional, to facilitating the whole healing process. We're not healers. We're not doctors. We just help people get on the way to better health, right? Which starts with spinal function, which starts maybe nutrition. But, that wouldn't be my expertise. But I'll still say, hey, you want to eat more, vegetables and greens and less, red meat, for example, right? But I wouldn't get into, health is so nuanced that ultimately people got to figure out for themselves what works best for them, right? So chiropractic is.
Do you mind if I just interrupt you for 1 second and ask the person behind you to stop doing the dishes?
Okay, right. You can see, can you stop watching because if I move, right?
No, you're fine. It's making a lot of noise, and it's kind of distracting. That's all.
Sorry. He can hear you washing the dishes, right?
Oh no, I haven't watched anything yet.
Harry, right?
So I just would like for you to kind of like tell me, all right, so you're at the Centennial, you're listening to Guy Reekman, you're sitting next to your friend you were at his funeral yesterday. You're seeing that this guy that sat next to you that day, that had his funeral yesterday, had made a difference. In what way did he make a difference? What's the status of chiropractic in Europe
what
these
happened?
days?
In 1990, there was a study done, which was, it was the Mead study, which showed chiropractic was more effective than physiotherapy, outpatient treatment for treating back pain. And so this caused a big jump in chiropractic in the UK. So everyone thought, wow, this is, amazing, right? So this is the way forward. So let's get really good at writing letters to medical doctors so they will refer all their patients for chiropractic, right? Which is, if you like, a conservative treatment for low back pain. So in theory, that kind of sounded, oh yeah, it's great, right? So what happened is the academics then started to take over the message because they were going to produce all this research. And they were going to do research which was probably about musculoskeletal pain syndromes, right? Now, when they started to do this, so they started to, all the other stuff is rubbish, right? And so how chiropractic started with Harvey Lillard, right? No, none of that, right? And so again, where Joe Rogan in his podcast, as if a guy could have his hearing cured. Now, but the interesting thing, lots of people went to Palmer to have their hearing cured, but it didn't help them. But it helped other things. And so then you had the theory, because you got to remember, when lots of people are comparing the origins of chiropractic, this was a time surgeons operated in their street clothes. They were bleeding people. It was 1895. It was a different world. And it's like, chiropractors are still, in that level of knowledge rather than what we know about the nervous system and whatever. And so as I when I came back and I was ready to graduate, I started to spend time with Steve and see how he worked. And, you kind of see the pharmaceutical, because chiropractors often saw medicine as the bad guys. I'd argue most medical doctors entered their profession with the same kind of motivation as we did, but the pharmaceutical industry has such a massive influence on how they practice and their business model, which is happening as well now to chiropractic, because if the pharmaceutical industry, hey, if you were kind of prescribing some anti-inflammatory and some drugs and whatever, we give you money for research. So the academics, that makes sense, because if you believe that evidence-based practice or evidence-based medicine is purely on the published research, well, you're going to go that way. But in 2002, I did a master's in health promotion, right? And I did my master's on vaccinations. And this was quite controversial to question, because the coin of the health promotion realm is vaccinate everybody, right? And they weren't keen on having me question it. But when I looked at what Sackett's model of evidence-based practice was, it was built on 3 pillars. One, the best available evidence, and that evidence could be just a case study. The experience of the practitioner to apply that evidence, that case study, to that person standing in front of them, and patient's beliefs. But most people's understanding, particularly in the chiropractic profession, has, it's about this published research. And we don't have the capacity to produce massive, kind of randomized control trials like Pfizer does. And so when they claim, and it's 95% effective, and if you want to see all the data, wait 75 years and then we'll release it. So we've been dragged screaming and shouting as chiropractors onto this treadmill that we can't get off, because we've allowed regulatory bodies to tell us how to practice, what is acceptable, what kind of claims you should make. And so, well, of course you shouldn't claim to treat cancer, but you could help the person who has cancer. And this is the weird thing. I was diagnosed with cancer in 2010. So when you get that kind of diagnosis, you're frightened. So I submit myself to the whole biomedical model, had surgery, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, everything, right? And 2012, I'm given the all clear. So I'm very happy, right? The following year, I go back for the annual checkup, and they tell me the cancer is back. It's metastasized, and average life expectancy is 22 months. This is 2013. And that 22 months with another 12 cycles of chemo. So I'm thinking like, hey, like Einstein's definition of doing the same thing over and over again. And as a definition, I was sandy. I said, nah. And this was the first time I started thinking like a chiropractor in relation to my own, right? How I'd manage it. And at the time, I didn't know what I would do. And I started having network chiropractic then, right? Going to Fiona Masden here in this country. And I started taking Rick Simpson cannabis oil. And the cancer went, and I'm still alive. And so, because everybody sees cannabis as a drug, I see it more as a plant that can grow. And so I'm really into this aspect. Again, chiropractic, nutrition, exercise, movement. But my expertise, I think, is chiropractic. And, and that's, so in 2007, the profession elected me onto the regulatory body. Just like they had a student president, I was going to sort it out. But after 9 months on this, it's a waste of time. I'm on a council with 20 others committed to a biomedical model.
I'm curious right there if you could talk about what your motivations were that even helped you accept that role. And then obviously you just mentioned what the harsh reality was or what the disappointment was. But what were you going into it hoping to accomplish if you didn't have that resistance, or if you didn't have all those distracted people that were trying to be something that chiropractic wasn't?
Well, obviously, from my experience as president of Students' Union and seeing the way I changed, I was confident, I could change it, right? And but then, it was, in 2004, they had taken me to the High Court. This is before Facebook, for writing. I was one of the early bloggers, right? And I was writing about that. When I did my master's dissertation, I put that as the blog. I was putting this information. So I thought, I knew. But once you're in, because you're bound by the confidentiality of the organization, you're sitting there and you kind of like, this is bullshit. So I went public with some of the stuff that had happened behind the scenes. And there's a number of associations, but the president of the British Chiropractic Association would be like the American Chiropractic Association, which is supposed to represent the practitioners, emailed the chairman of the regulatory body saying, oh, Richard Lanigan said this, right? So I was, for going public with the crap that was going on the regulatory body, I was kicked off. But the interesting thing, when I was elected onto the council, I would say all of them, would have been against me. But I was only voted off 13-7. So some argued, oh, if I stayed longer, but I didn't. I just wanted to practice. I like what I do, dealing with these people and their lies and the carry on and their desire to criticize other was not really what I, was about. And I just...
So I've heard over and over and over again that the motivating factors of these people that you're mentioning is that they want to be more accepted in the medical model, that they would love for chiropractic to be given more rights, to be able to, chiropractors be able to work in hospitals or bill insurance or whatever it is that would allow these chiropractors to make more money and be more accepted in the medical system's eyes, kind of like the osteopaths did in the US. I know it's different in Europe.
No, it's the same. The interesting thing, how the osteopaths in Europe are different, but the chiropractors in Europe are going just like the osteopaths in America. In 2000, because again, this is why I really became active. The Health and Social Care Act of 2000 in the UK opened prescribing for chiropractors and osteopaths, right? The president of the British Chiropractic Association announced to the profession, this is chiropractic coming of age. And I challenge him on this. And this is why we ended up, I was one of the founder members of the ICA equivalent in the UK is called the United Chiropractic Association. And we found that as a response. And they realized that the people leading the profession, actually, the profession didn't want to be prescribing, right? So it's the analogy I use is like the way you boil a frog, so you realize, oh, we've stepped too far now, we step back. Because at the time, I liked what was called the ACC paradigm, which like lots of people might disagree from either wing of the profession. But the point of it was that this was a consensus document that most people could sign up to, and it was the ICA signed up to it, the ACA. In Europe, the people who pulled the plug was the British Chiropractic Association at the ECU. Because that, if you have everybody, that 80% particular in the with common ground, that we could agree what we do, why we do it, what we call ourselves, then it's easier for the profession to move forward rather than have this 50-50 split where, we're calling each other's names. It's like, you have the wagon train and it draws the wagons into a circle. But instead of shooting out, we're shooting each other, right? And that's what we do all the time. And it's just so stupid. So after I was kicked off the regulatory body, but I was still on the register because I didn't want people to complain that I was actually kicked out of the profession. But then in 2009, I resigned from the licensing board as well, right? So they said, oh, you can't, because the only sanction they have is to strike you off. So normally people don't go off of their own volition. And I said, look, I've been in my community now for 20 years. They know me. They know I'm good. I will get patients, right? Regardless of, what the regulatory. And they sent private investigators into my practice twice, posing as patients, trying to get me to say, I mean, it was crazy. Like,
Is that because they want you to continue to
no,
pay
because they want,
annually,
because
or
that's
is
a
that because
criminal
they just
offense
have a
in the
personal
UK.
vendetta against you?
No, it would be a criminal offense for me to use the title chiropractor to call myself. I can't call myself a chiropractor now. So they go, but I have my, because they said I couldn't put my qualifications on the wall, and I have them up there. So the private investigator said, oh, you are a chiropractor. And I'd say, well, you can call me that if you want to, because everybody calls me a chiropractor. I just can't call it myself. So he goes, well, what do you call yourself? And I'd say, Richard. So they spent recently, they did it. They spent, I don't know, like £20,000, $40,000 trying to get a private investigator to come in. And even without his report, they took a private prosecution, took me to court, but then they withdrew at the last minute, and they had to pay their legal costs, which were about 20,000, and my legal costs, right? And this is the regulator. Now, if you use that money to say, hey, to promote chiropractic, to say, okay, I don't care. Of course, chiropractic helps back pain, right? And as I said, but if you help back pain, you're helping someone's immune system. You're helping them to move. It does lots of things. It improves the blood supply to the brain. But you don't need to be specific. People come in to me. Usually there's some kind of pain with them, right? But it's always weird if I get a husband and wife over a 6-month period, and one's come in, say, with a headache, and another's come in with back pain or something. And then they go home and said, he did the same thing to me. He just checked the spine, start on the pelvis, and work my way up to the atlas. And, I checked for subluxation. The first visit, yeah, of course, I would be interested in their problem and some people might say, that's a medical assessment when I take the history. And yeah, but after that, then I'm just, correcting subluxations. And, of course I'll talk to, if they ask me, oh, my shoulder's hurting. Yeah, I'll take an interest. I'm not going to say, okay, I'm not interested in you, but I have empathy. And no, I just correct subluxations, right? I'm a people person. So I'm not, because if you say, no, that's all I do. Well, that's like saying, okay, I'm a Jew and I hate Muslims, or I'm a Catholic and I hate Protestants. Well, yeah, and so I guess that makes me some kind, a mixer of some sort. But, that's fine. I just do what I enjoy doing. And I'm going back when you're a student, right? It's the haters are the problems. I hate people who try and screw me over, right? Who send private investigators in, who wouldn't dream of saying it to my face, because they would get a mouthful back, right? So it was always weird, right?
I'm curious, just having been involved in the community for so many years, maybe 30 years at this point, can you look at your community and say that it's getting stronger, it's growing?
Oh, no, because there's been weak. Because this is the weird thing. Because the general chiropractic took that prosecution the last few months, that's brought me back in. And so the more conservative element of the profession goes, why? Why did they do that? Because I hadn't blogged about chiropractic. I hadn't done anything like that. I had blogged a bit about vaccinations and stuff, right? But I had, nothing, because it's a choice. If you want to be on the regulatory body, if you want to practice that way, it's okay. I have no problem, right? If that's the way you want to work. But if you're going to slag me off, because like, oh, it's voodoo. It's the interesting thing is, I don't know, did you hear about the Simon Singh case here in
No.
the UK? Simon Singh is a science journalist, a well-known particle physics guy. And he wrote a very negative article about chiropractic on the Guardian newspaper, a major newspaper. So, and it was similar to what Joe Rogan said, right? But because I was talking about the regulatory, the British Chiropractic Association decided to sue him in court. And I went, this is ridiculous, right? Yeah, a lot of what he said was bullshit, but he's entitled to have those views. And he has those views because we're not, if you're going to get a load of lawyers to argue with him, then, you lack credibility to make the case for chiropractic. And I had said this in the blog. And he got in touch with me because he was scared if he lost, he'd maybe lose his house and everything. And he reached out to me. And it was because there's no biological basis for chiropractic, saying it can, affect the middle ear, say, right? Chiropractic is still making these claims, still like that. And I explained how, the upper cervical, right, and the Eustachian tube are, kind of, there's connections. And if you, were to adjust them, you could free it up. And because it's like a blocked drain. And that's why the pain is in the ear, not because necessarily a bacteria. And it intrigued me. We became friends. And it always intrigued me that I could get a medical doctor to write a positive article about chiropractic. But the chiropractors would go, oh, that's bullshit. Subluxation bullshit. And it's one of the reasons when Meryl Getterman wrote her book, Subluxation Foundations of Chiropractic, right? I thought, while it wasn't, if you like, BJ's traditional explanation of chiropractic, she used the biomedical model of subluxation. I said, well, they look at subluxation as, say, hypermobility, while chiropractors use it as loss of mobility. So at the extremes, you have partial dislocation or a fusion of a joint, which would both be kind of basically contraindicated to adjust that particular, joint. But how she articulated it actually it was easy to explain to the public. So when people go, oh, subluxation's rubbish, and you go, well, it's a medical term, but how they use it, right? So then you kind of go, well, when you're doing an adjustment, so you're affecting mechanoreceptors, you're affecting other things, and what is innate intelligence? Innate intelligence is homeostasis, right? So this was the terminology of its day. And like 20 years ago, they only then identified the endocannabinoid system and how it has receptors in the immune system and central nervous system. So the idea, that this theory that Palmer put forward is rubbish and unscientific. And, if you look at Kendall and Schwartz's latest neurology book, for the first time ever, it identifies the endocannabinoid system. So a large part of the chiropractic profession is how we articulate what we do, our relationship with medicine. And it goes back to what I said at the start. So if a medical person thinks we're pretending to be medical doctors because we use the title, well, because, they're so protected. Because if a medical doctor was calling himself a chiropractor, we'd be pissed off if he had no training, right? And this is something I've always felt, because I suppose when, because it was more of an American thing to use the title doctor, but it's been embraced now in the rest of Europe. And it's convenient for the biomedical people who want to take the profession But because, again, they're not articulating, well, how are you different? But what do you do? And so the only way forward is to do like the osteopaths did in America, is to assimilate, is to, because in that Joe Rogan video, the woman he was talking to, because she smokes weed and has a tattoo, it gives her credibility. But, she said, oh, right, and osteopaths are much better at doing spinal manipulation. And you kind of go, well, that doesn't make sense, because if osteopaths don't adjust, and chiropractic, it's the major part of what we do, how on earth could they be better at doing it? It's like saying, yeah. And if Tiger Woods wanted to improve his putting, he should spend more time in the library. And
I think that's like a perfect segue right there. I think that's a great way to kind of transition into like talking. You've spoken a lot about kind of the internal conflicts within the profession and the resistance from society or from other organizations or from other professions towards the chiropractic profession. But now I would love for you to kind of just share like the positives that you observe in Europe, what's going on, what gives you a little bit of like, or just things you can touch on that you know of based on your perspectives and your experiences that you could say, hey, there's actually things happening now that weren't happening 20 years ago. There's actually more proper representation of what chiropractic is by other organizations that are maybe sprouting up, or by different groups that you're aware of, or maybe books have come out or schools have been created, or whatever you see that you can actually say to a student who's watching this right now, hey, I'm thinking of being a chiropractor. I'm in Ireland right now. I just interviewed a guy from Ireland who went to the Barcelona school, and he was like very much ready for the real world. He was graduating ready to go out and do his thing. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on like.
Yeah, well, okay. If you would have, asked me that, right, say before the pandemic, I would have kind of said, geez, it's so much worse, right? It's so, the divisions are, just like in America, there's all the bad feeling. And weirdly, I can't say this for definite now, but this is the feeling I've got. Because the Barcelona college, the head at Barcelona is Adrian Wemban. And he was a guy I knew when we were starting the UCA, in response, and that was 20 years ago, in response to prescribing and stuff, right? And again, he was a chiropractor, who I could interact with, say, intellectually. And that's because as Barcelona came at the right time, as where I went, AECC, the College of Glamorgan, and the Odense College, all the colleges in the Europe started moving medically, right? And it was unbelievable. I'm watching this. When I graduated, every year, I probably had 2 or 3 people I met who went to chiropractic college, right? On my recommendation, went to where I have. I haven't sent someone to chiropractic college for now probably 12, 13 years. My children never even mentioned it. Is someone like, if my children, right, and someone has talked to you, now this is going to sound awful to students listening, right? But a couple of years ago, if someone said, oh, I want to study chiropractic, right? And I said, well, you're going to go to a medical institution. You're going to end up coming out, now they're calling you quacks, and you don't have access, because this doesn't make sense. Before I got a qualification, when I was in Denmark, I could walk into any sports club, oh, Richard, and as soon as I have the title, guys, wow, these are quacks, these are dangerous, they kill people, right? So I would have said to students, train as a physiotherapist, go and spend a year with someone like Steve Carpenter or me, learn the philosophy of chiropractic, learn to be a good adjuster. And so then you have easy access. Because if you want to make a difference, you need people, right? If you want to be a good practitioner, we're we are joined, if you like, by a common philosophy rather than a common title. The title is chiropractor, but there's so much division. However, a college is just about to open in Scotland. Ross McDonald's behind it. A guy, we were at college together. We were in the same year, right? And he's very switched on. And I think COVID has been really interesting in terms it provides an opportunity for the chiropractic profession. Because at the start, all the people running the profession, the government was saying, oh, chiropractic can't help someone with COVID. You got to be vaccinated. And it would be good PR if when everything was locked down, if you allowed your clinics to be used as vaccination centers, or if you trained to give a vaccine. And the vast majority of the chiropractors, they were horrified by this. You know what I mean? It just went completely against, even because you didn't have to be, if you like, an anti-vaxxer to kind of think, no, I'm not going to start giving vaccine. You know, I think like, okay, you know, I want to promote health and well-being. So looking now as we come out of the pandemic and everybody's starting to realize how much propaganda and bullshit was given to us. See, it I suppose because it was election year in America when it kicked off. So you have Republican and Democrats who choose different sides. So how you were going to cope with COVID, or whether you were vaccinated, or whether you wore a mask, or whatever you were going to do, had nothing to do with political ideology. It was to do with,
though, that the conflict that was created from COVID has helped clarify people's position that they're different, that they think differently than the government maybe, or than the medical profession as chiropractors, when before they were so busy trying to be medical doctors or be a part of the medical profession. Now they're saying, wait, there are clear differences. This is not something I'm in agreement with. I'm different. I'm talking about the biomedical chiropractic.
yeah, no, but I think it's important. There were lots of doctors who were questioning, right? So when you use, again, a generic term like the medical profession or the chiropractic profession, you know, there were people in the medical who were raising the question. It didn't make sense. I mean, a few years ago, I was on. I was invited.
So how does that help? How does that help the profession move forward? That's really the question.
Because we realize we have a better understanding of this biomedical model, that it's all right to question this propaganda, and it's to do with, you know, optimal well-being, how you kind of approach health. Do you get healthy in the pharmacy? Is that where health is? Or is health something that you've got to be proactive, take a proactive role in, right? I mean, you know,
besides Scotland and besides Barcelona,
the amount of opioids addiction in America.
Sure.
And people started, you know, is there something more conservative I should start? I mean, I'm not saying nobody would benefit from pain relief of some kind of an opioid. If if your leg was hanging off or something and you need something. But
so you were getting into a juicy part there with Scotland. You had a connection with Ross McDonald. You believe that he switched on, like Barcelona. Obviously, you said you could have an intellectual conversation with Adrian Wenbin. Are these people creating opportunities now for there to be a chiropractic presence, a true chiropractic presence within the legislation bodies or the political system?
Well, okay, you see, that's as we know, right? I mean, like if you're talking about politics in America, right?
No, chiropractic politics in Europe.
I'm talking about, I'm making the analogy for your audience, right? Okay, so there's this idea, right, in America, like, okay, so you've got, and they would call Biden and Barack Obama and them socialists and whatnot. They're not socialists. They're part of a political establishment, right? And see, this is the weird thing about Trump. While I wouldn't have a lot of time for Trump, he wasn't part of the political establishment. And if you want to understand Trump better, there was a really good ESPN movie called Three Potato or Small Potatoes about when he owned when the USFL tried to come into being, right? He's a businessman, right? But because it was interesting because he wasn't part of the political establishment, how hard it was to function. And that's the same everywhere. So when I was elected by the majority, right? Whether it was President Student Union or onto the regulatory body, I've never been part of the establishment because I don't care what people think of me. I say what I think. If you like it, great. If you don't like it, fine too. It doesn't bother me. So when people like me or Trump or Fidel Castro come in, they rock the boat. And people are unnerved by that. And it goes back. So you gravitate to people who sound confident, they know what they're talking about. My biggest strength is to ask questions and to recognize how little I know. And if I'm questioning somebody who's talking like they know, particularly the political elite, I'll go, you're talking shit, right? I know you're talking. And that upsets them because it's highlighting to everybody else they don't know so much. And that was, I think, why people gravitated towards me, because I was willing to do something that they were kind of, frightened to do. So when people like Ross and Adrian put their head above the parapet, but the difficulty is because, it's crazy. The GCC, the regulatory body, the Greater General Chiropractic Council in the UK, right, receives about £3 million a year from registrants. They waste most of that on taking vexatious cases against chiropractors fighting amongst each other. They have, at a conservative estimate, I reckon they have wasted £20 million over the last 10 years fighting these kind of things. If you use that money to say, wow, chiropractic can really help you, it should be your first option, when you have, how I break it down, right? First, you kind of look, what's the most important thing for life? It's oxygen, right? Then you got water, then you got food, then, movement. And, so by the time pathology sets in, when you need sickness care, medical, well, we should come way before that. Like, you might go to a personal trainer. You might go to a chiropractor. Yeah, get my subluxations, right? I wouldn't say, having subluxation correct is the most important thing. I would say having oxygen and clean air is the most important thing, followed by clean water, followed by good nutrition, But then, hey, you make the subluxation correct. It comes in with, movement and exercise. And so